The UFC is back in the Apex this weekend with, if we're being honest with each other, not the best fight night on paper, not a ton of ranked fighters, not a ton of big names, but oftentimes these end up being some of the most exciting cards. We have some fun matchups here, so I'm going to be running through my full card predictions, main card, and prelims, talking about who I think gets it done and how they do it. If you guys enjoy the video, do me a huge favor, hit that like button and subscribe. Would love to hear your thoughts down below. But let's just dive right into the first matchup here where we have Charles Johnson taking on Ramazan Temirov. This should not be the opening fight of the night. On this card, this should be like a main card matchup. Some of that flyweight disrespect. Hopefully it gets bumped up, before the fight night actually takes place. But if we do start off this way, it's a great way to start off the night. Charles Johnson has been on an absolute roll. 4 straight wins against pretty solid competition. Azat Maxim was an undefeated prospect who he beat. He beat Jake Hadley. He knocked out Joshua Van, who also looked like a top prospect and still is. And then he also beat Sumadarji. So pretty solid competition there. 4 straight wins. He's had some finishing upside. He knocked out Joshua Van, but he's also dropped his last 3 opponents. The issue for Charles Johnson is that he has struggled against wrestlers. In his 4 losses, he was taken down at least 3 times. In all 6 of his UFC wins, he was taken down 2 times or fewer. So pretty much if Charles Johnson has been able to stuff the takedowns, not get controlled on the ground, he has a very strong chance of winning that fight. He has a pretty large frame for flyweight. He's 5'9" with a 70-inch reach. He fights from the outside, pushes a pretty solid pace, even in a lot of his losses. If he's getting wrestled and the other guy's kind of winning round 1, round 2, typically he is closing strong with an impressive round 3. On the other side here with Temirov, he is an 18-2 prospect. He is very small, but he hits like an absolute tank. 5'4" with a 63-inch reach. 11 of his 18 wins are by knockout. In his UFC debut, he KO'd CJ Vergara. I honestly just feel like Charles Johnson's kind of a bad matchup here for Temirov. I think Johnson's going to be able and should want to keep his range here. Charles Johnson is very durable. He's never been finished, and he's only been dropped 1 time in 10 UFC fights. So he could get caught, sure, but I think Charles Johnson's going to stay on the outside. I don't think Temirov has the wrestling upside to really threaten Charles Johnson there. So I'm going to go with Charles Johnson by decision. Now moving over to Montana De La Rosa taking on Luana Carolina. Montana De La Rosa is coming off a decision win over Andrea Lee. She had lost her previous 3 before that. She is at her best when she is getting her grappling going. She has 6 UFC wins. 3 of them are by sub. 1 is with a ground pound knockout. And then in the 2 decisions, one she had 3 takedowns, and then the other one she had 9 minutes of control time. So if she is able to get the grappling going, she has a pretty good shot of taking home the W. She's also just faced the much tougher competition. Some of her losses are to Tatiana Suarez, Macy Barber, Mayra Bueno Silva, Viviane Araujo. So 2 of those women have fought for titles. Araujo has been, in the mix at flyweight for a while now. Macy Barber climbing the rankings, probably going to fight for a title at some point in her career. So very strong strength of schedule. She's not necessarily, getting wins over those women, but still putting up, decent efforts. And then on the other side with Carolina, she is on a 3-fight win streak, but the level of competition has been very, very low. On that 3-fight win streak, those women have a combined UFC record of 6-16. So not great there. She can win fights with her striking and her grappling, but she really isn't dominant in one specific area. She's kind of just like, matchup dependent. In this one, I'd imagine she'll want to keep it standing due to the grappling of Montana De La Rosa. I think this is close. Like, this has just potential split decision written all over it. I slightly lean Montana De La Rosa by decision, but I do think it's going to be competitive. Could be a split decision in this matchup. Now moving over to Lucas Almeida taking on Danny Silva. Almeida's had mixed results in the UFC so far. He is 2-2 in the promotion. In his wins, he had a knockout and a decision win. In his losses, he was knocked out and then submitted. In his 15 wins, he has finished 14 of them, 9 by knockout, 5 by submission. But in the UFC, he's been pretty purely a striker. He hasn't landed a single takedown in any of his 4 fights. He's definitely dangerous on the feet, but can be a little bit chinny. He's been dropped in 2 of his UFC fights so far. On the other side, Danny Silva is a dog. If you have not seen his fight on the Contender Series, I highly recommend watching it. That's where he showed off the striking, has clean boxing, he's durable, works the body really well, and then also just kept a pretty crazy pace in that 3-round fight. On the other side, in his UFC debut, he relied on the wrestling. He landed 4 takedowns, 5 minutes of control time. So he can go out there and stand and bang, but he can also mix it up with the wrestling. And that's what I kind of like about Danny Silva in this matchup. I think he's the more well-rounded guy. I think he'll be competitive on the feet with Almeida. Could hurt him in certain spots, but I do think the wrestling can kind of be the difference maker, allow him to mix things in. And I do think at some point, Danny Silva finds a knockout here. We've seen Almeida get clipped. I think Danny Silva can do it, so I'm going to go with him by knockout. Now moving over to Andrea Lee taking on JJ Aldrich. Andrea Lee is in a tough spot here. She's on a 5-fight losing streak. This pretty much has to be the last stand. I honestly thought her last fight would have been her last stand, but you can't lose 6 in a row and stay in the promotion. She actually has pretty solid boxing, but her takedown defense has just been a massive hindrance to her. In some of her recent fights, she was taken down 3 times, controlled for 10 minutes by Viviane Araujo. She was taken down twice by Macy Barber. She was taken down 3 times, gave up 3 minutes of control against Miranda Maverick, 3 takedowns, 2 minutes of control against Montana De La Rosa. And so it's not like she's being taken down and held down for rounds at a time, but she just doesn't really have the power to like stamp rounds or finish fights. So if they're just going, strike for strike on the feet, and then she gets taken down, some ground and pound landed, like she is going to lose that round because it's not like she's going out there like dropping, really hurting women, even though she does have pretty clean boxing. So just the inability to stuff the takedowns has been a big problem for her. On the other side with JJ Aldrich, she's been fine. She's 2-3 in her last 5. Hasn't really relied on her wrestling, 0 takedowns in her last 4 fights, which would be a good sign for Andrea Lee. And then in her UFC career, a 23% takedown accuracy. I don't think Aldrich should be a 2-1 favorite, which she is right now, but I just think it's tough to pick Andrea Lee at this point on a 5-fight losing streak. She has gone up against pretty tough competition. I would not be shocked if she won this fight, but it is just tough to actually pick her here. So I'm going to go with Aldrich by decision, but I do think it's going to be closer than, maybe the odds are implying. Now moving over to a bantamweight matchup, we have Douglas Silva de Andrade taking on John Castaneda. I really like De Silva. He's a powerful striker. He's been in the UFC for a while, debuted in 2014. He has faced some really high-level competition. Petr Yan, Lerone Murphy, Chito Vera, Rob Font. He's a finisher, 22 finishes and 29 wins. 20 of those come by knockout, so very, very dangerous on the feet. He is coming off a loss to Miles Johns. He's getting up there in age at 39, especially for the lighter weight classes. Like 39, you're typically retired or really starting to wind down. And then he also just hasn't been super active, looked a little bit flat in that Miles Johns fight, which isn't great, when we're projecting him in this matchup. For John Castaneda, he is coming off a decision loss to Daniel Marcos. Really no shame there. He's undefeated, putting together some nice wins, but he had won his previous 2. He's well-rounded in his 21 wins. He has 7 knockouts, 7 submissions, 7 decision wins. He has landed knockdowns in 3 of his last 4 wins, and then he has landed at least 3 takedowns in back-to-back wins. He's younger, has less tread on the tires. I think he can mix it up if he wants to. I'm going to go with John Castaneda by decision. If De Silva went out and clipped him, found a finish, I wouldn't be shocked. He does have that type of upside. But if this is going the distance, getting into the later rounds, I have to side with the youth of John Castaneda in this matchup. Then moving up a weight class, we have Ricardo Ramos taking on Chepe Mariscal at featherweight. Ramos hasn't had the same success since moving up to 145. He went 4-1 when he was down at bantamweight. He is a 500 fighter at featherweight at 4-4. He is well-rounded, 7 wins by submission. He has 2 spinning back elbow KOs in the UFC, which is pretty wild. He just hasn't handled like the higher level featherweight competition as well. So he has losses to Lerone Murphy, Zubairo Tukhugov, Charles Jourdain, and Julia Rosa. So all really solid fighters, some better than others. But when he's fighting like those legit proven guys at featherweight, it hasn't really gone well. Chepe on the other side of this one is legit. He's 4-0 in the UFC, wins over Damon Jackson, Morgan Charrier, Jack Jenkins, and then Trevor Peek. He has one of the most crazy pre-UFC strength of schedules that I've ever seen. These are all guys he fought before he got into the UFC. Bryce Mitchell, Yusuf Zalal, Gregor Gillespie, Pat Sabatini, Joanderson Brito, and Steve Garcia. If you told me those were his first 6 matchups in the UFC, I'd be like, wow, they're just throwing him to the wolves. The fact that that was before the UFC is crazy. I really haven't seen anything like that. Chepe is tough. He pushes a pace, mixes in his wrestling. Just a really tough out. If you're not putting him away early, he is a tough guy to beat. I just think Chepe is better in this matchup. I think he's going to put the pace on him. I think he's going to win the later rounds, and I'm going to take him by decision. Now, moving up to welterweight, we have Danny Barlow taking on Sam Patterson. I think Danny Barlow has a very bright future. He's 29 years old, 9-0 as a pro, 5 knockouts, 1 submission. He's a pretty big frame for welterweight, 6'2", 79-inch reach. He's explosive. He hits hard. He's 2-0 in the UFC. On the other side, Sam Patterson also has a very large frame. He's 6'3", 78-inch reach. I believe he debuted at 155, which is just crazy, given that frame. He's going to want to get this fight to the ground. 7 of his 12 wins are by submission. He has back-to-back submission wins over Kiefer Crosby and Johan Lainez. He is a little bit chinny. He's been knocked out in the first round in both of his losses. I'm just higher on Danny Barlow here. I think he's going to go farther in this weight class. And the fact that he has that really dangerous fight-ending power scares me a little bit here for Sam Patterson. So I think he's going to catch him early. I'm going Danny Barlow, round 1 knockout. Now, this next fight is interesting, and I do think it could end up being more exciting than maybe some people are expecting. William Gomis taking on Hyder Amil. Gomis is not really known for having these super exciting fights, but I think Hyder Amil really could bring it to him in this matchup. So Gomis is 4-1 in the UFC. He's a well-rounded fighter, but primarily a striker, but, can mix in the grappling if he really needs to. The issue here for Gomis is he's just kind of lacked the finishing upside against the UFC caliber competition. He does have 1 finish in those 4 wins, but it was against Giannis Gamori, who's 0-2 in the UFC. His other fight, he got nuked by Peyton Talbot in I think it was under 20 seconds, just, put out right away. And then he has no knockdowns in his 4 fights. So he's kind of struggled to stamp matchups. He has split decision wins against both Joe Anderson Brito and Francis Marshall. So he's keeping fights close. The Brito win was fairly controversial. The Francis Marshall one seems like it could have gone either way. He's not a super high volume fighter. He's kind of willing to just stay on the outside, kind of pick at you. Hyder Amil is not that. He is extremely fun, 10-0 as a pro, 2-0 in the UFC. The dude fights like an absolute psycho. He pushes an insanely high pace. He works in the grappling. He pretty much just willingly puts himself into dogfights. And he is not someone who's going to be okay losing a low volume decision. He is going to force you to fight the way that he wants to fight. And that's going to be interesting in this matchup here. I think he's going to force Gomis to fight a style of fight that he is uncomfortable with. And Hyder Amil could get caught, right? He puts himself in danger. He throws a lot out there. He can get clipped, but I'm going to pick him by round 2 knockout here. I think he's going to come in. I think he's going to bring the fight to Gomis. And I think he overwhelms him. And I think he finds a round 2 finish. Now, I think the one heavyweight matchup on this card, we have Austen Lane taking on Mario Pinto. This is pretty much a locked-in Apex heavyweight fight. Lane is 1-2 in the UFC. He was knocked out by Justin Tafa and Janata Deniz in his 2 losses. His 1 win was a unanimous decision against Robelis de Spain, who just has 0 grappling ability. This is Pinto's UFC debut, 9-0, 5 knockouts, 1 submission. I'm honestly just not super high on Austen Lane. I think he loses on the feet to the vast majority of UFC heavyweights, and I just don't see him control grappling Pinto. So I'm going to go with Mario Pinto here by knockout. Then one of the most exciting fights on this card, we have Nasrat Haqparast taking on Esteban Ribovics. Nasrat's kind of quietly on a 4-fight winning streak here against McDessie, Quinones, Malarkey, and then Jared Gordon, which was a split decision, pretty controversial. I thought that one should have gone to Jared Gordon. He's almost entirely a striker, only landed a takedown in 1 of his last 12 fights. On the other side with Ribovics, he is an extremely fun prospect. He's well-rounded, 7 knockouts, 5 submissions, but he has been almost entirely a striker with his time in the UFC. He's currently on a 3-fight win streak. The last 2 were extremely impressive. He had a 37-second knockout against Terrence McKinney, and then a Fight of the Year contender against Daniel Zellhuber on that UFC Sphere card. Both guys are very durable. Both can crack. Both hit hard. I just think Ribovics is the better guy in this matchup. I think he is the better striker. He is the more impressive recent wins, and I think he gets this one done by decision. Now, we have arrived at the co-main event, and this is one of the sorriest co-main events I've ever seen, if we're being honest here. Cody Brundage taking on Julian Marquez. Not saying it's not going to be a fun fight, but both these guys have been on very, very rough runs. Cody Brundage pretty much has 1 real win in his last 7 fights. So he was knocked out by Mikhail Olashechuk. Then he was submitted by Vieira. Then he had a unanimous decision loss to Cedricus Dumas. He had a DQ win against Jacob Malkoun in a fight that he was losing badly. Then he had a slam KO against Zachary Reese, his one win here. Then he was subbed by Bo Nickel, and then he had a no contest against Al Hassan in a fight that he was losing, getting rocked in. So he's had a couple of these ones where it looks like he's about to lose and he gets a DQ win or he gets a no contest. On the other side with Marquez, he has lost 3 in a row. He has been knocked out in all 3 of those. Gregory Rodriguez, Marc-Andre Barrio, and then Zachary Reese. Cody Brundage's best skill set is his wrestling, but he has just consistently struggled to get it going. He's not super durable on the feet. He's pretty unwilling to get in dogfights. He can hit hard if he does catch Marquez, and Marquez, has been a little bit chinny. The durability seemingly has faded, but Julian Marquez will get in dogfights, and he has won fights where he has been out wrestled and been able to overcome that to get the win. I'm going to go with Julian Marquez here by round 1 knockout. It really is tough to be confident in either of these guys, and I wouldn't say me picking Julian Marquez, I'm super confident in him. I just think he's been more willing to get into these tough matchups. When he's losing, he's getting nuked. I don't think Cody Brundage is going to do that in a high percentage, of opportunities in this matchup. So Marquez is the pick. I think he finds an early knockout. And then the main event here, by far the best fight on this card, Manel Kape taking on Asu Almabayev. Manel Kape's been on a roll here. He has won 5 of his last 6. The only loss he had was a pretty controversial fight against Muhammad Mokaev. Not a fun matchup, but certainly very, very close. He is coming off just a masterclass win against Bruno Silva. Was actually at that card. It was crazy to see in person. Had the arena going wild. He's a dangerous striker, explosive, can push a pace on the feet, and has the ability to really hurt his opponents. 6 knockdowns in his last 6 fights. Almabayev is 4-0 in the UFC. He had a submission win in his debut, and then 3 straight decisions. His best win is a decision against Mateusz Nicolau. He is well-rounded, but prefers to grapple. In his career, he has 3 knockouts, 9 submissions. He has landed 18 takedowns in his 4 UFC fights. So he is going to want to get the wrestling going in this matchup. Looking at these guys' 5-round experience, Manel Kape has never gone 5 rounds, not in the UFC. Do not believe he did it before the UFC. Almabayev did it 1 time outside the UFC, but it's not like one guy has the significant edge in that area. Kape is certainly not impossible to take down, but he has a strong 77% takedown defense. He fought Muhammad Mokaev and was only held down for 2 minutes. I don't think Almabayev is a better grappler than Mokaev. Maybe I'm off base on that, but Muhammad Mokaev had been pretty successful with his grappling, being able to control guys, finding submissions, and Manel Kape, I think, handled it fine. I think the vast majority of this fight is going to be on the feet, and I just think Manel Kape has the major advantage there. So I'm going to pick Manel Kape by decision. I would not be shocked if he found a finish, particularly in the later rounds. Maybe Almabayev kind of wears himself out, trying to push the wrestling, and Kape is able to finish him. But my pick is going to be Manel Kape by decision. And then I think he's setting himself up to, potentially fight for a title, maybe the winner of the proposed Pantoja Kai Kara-France fight. But that is going to wrap it up for this one. Let me know your thoughts. Who are you guys picking in these matchups? Thank you all for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next one.